tonight, big night of continuing breaking news this evening. In rolls the first stages, finally, of this year-and-a-half-long investigation, which is supposed to be designed to figure out whether President Trump's campaign colluded or conspired with Russian operatives to throw the 2016 election. So we're going to break this down, whether or not any of it really appears to point definitively in that direction. In other words, what have we learned tonight about what Robert Mueller has found so far, and what does it actually tell us about the big picture? So Michael Cohen, the president's former self-declared fixer, we've learned a lot about him and his character this evening. They have recommended substantial prison time for him. Also accusing President Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, who had a lot of ties to a lot of people before he joined that campaign. They've basically said that he is guilty of discernible lies in the violation of his plea agreement. The government is none too happy with Paul Manafort, and that's quite clear. Good evening, everybody. I'm Martha MacCallum, and this is definitely the story tonight. President Trump says he feels confident in the early take that he sees in all of this, tweeting this: totally clears the president. Thank you! Exclamation point. Catherine Herridge has been going over all of it tonight as the news has been breaking and the information has been coming in. Catherine, good to have you with us this evening as you watched all of this pour in. Let's break it into the two parts, the two people. Starting with Michael Cohen, as you go through these documents, what is the most damning information against Michael Cohen, and what pieces of it potentially implicate President Trump in any way?
Right. That's a great question. So late today, for folks at home, just to kind of bring them up to date, we had two filings in the Michael Cohen case. One was from the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York, and the other was from the special counsel. These were what they call sentencing memos. As you mentioned, substantial jail time, about 4 years, and a fine of $500,000. Buried in one of the filings from the special counsel is kind of an indication or a flavor of the kind of information that he provided to investigators about contacts between Russian officials and the Trump campaign. And that section of the filing reads, Cohen provided the SCO, that's the acronym for the Special Counsel Office, with useful information concerning certain discrete Russia-related matters core to its investigation that he obtained by virtue of his regular contact with company executives during the campaign. Cohen provided relevant and useful information concerning his contacts with persons connected to the White House during the 2017 and 2018 time period. What we don't know tonight, Martha, is who those Russian individuals were, what was the nature of the outreach, and did it actually connect in the end, and was there any follow-through? But we know Cohen has provided information related to these allegations of collusions with a foreign government, in this case, Russia, Martha.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. When you go through this filing from the Southern District of New York, which is 40-some pages, and then the government's version is about 8 pages, and any time served would be concurrent. That's the request of Robert Mueller's team and the special counsel. But there's a lot of stuff that was kicked up to, so to speak, the New York, Southern District of New York investigation, because it was not relevant to Mueller's investigation. So I guess what I'm asking is, how much of this 40 pages would have happened to Michael Cohen, tax evasion, all of this stuff, and how much of the 4 years without any of the lines that relate to anything that might have to do with the campaign?
Well, what jumped out at me in the filing is that there was a recognition that Michael Cohen had provided some useful information to the special counsel, but this was not enough to mitigate what the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York felt was a substantial pattern of deceit and fraud by Michael Cohen. Those charges with the U.S. Attorney relate to bank fraud, tax fraud, and campaign finance violations. As you rightly point out, that was kind of carved out of the special counsel investigation, but you can still see with the filings today, and they're worth reading, how the two groups, the U.S. Attorney and the special counsel, continue to work together in this matter, Martha.
Right. So then you've got basically two areas of connection, as I see it here. You have Stormy Daniels and Karen, I believe is her first name, McDougal, the two people who there were financial agreements with to essentially keep quiet, and that arrangement was made shortly before the November elections. So that has raised a question of campaign finance violations and whether or not that money was directly paid for the purpose of helping the president's election. And the other one is the Moscow project, which he was not truthful about in terms of saying when his outreach to them ended. He said it ended in January, but then he said, actually, I lied about that. It ended in June. So those are the two areas that seem to be the most potent here for future, for more future revelations, correct?
Right. So you make a good point about the campaign finance violations, because the U.S. attorney argues that what Cohen did was sort of so elaborate and so heavily embroidered, you know, a shell company and, you know, crazy names and not real names and using a media organization. So it was a very elaborate, very sort of deceitful. It was very deliberate, if you will, for lack of a better term. So this is one of the reasons that they're punishing him. On the Moscow real estate project, I think we need to not read too much into this filing. It's deliberately vague, right? For reasons that are obvious, which is that the special counsel doesn't want to tip its hand as to what other information that they have. But they do talk about a specific time frame, which is 2017 and 2018, which of course is after the Moscow real estate project ended. So it does sound to me like there are two buckets of information here. One related to the Moscow project in 2016, so during the presidential campaign, and then contacts afterwards in 2017 and 2018, Martha.
Catherine, thank you very much. Great to have you with us as we make our way through all of this tonight. Catherine Herridge in Washington. Let me bring in now Jim Trusty, former prosecutor for the Department of Justice. Jim, great to have you with us this evening. You've been listening to this whole conversation and going through these documents, and we're primarily discussing Michael Cohen first, and then we'll move on to Manafort. But you listened to our conversation with Catherine. What jumps out at you about how culpable or how much connection there may be here between the president and these activities?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that come to mind. I mean, one is I'm really still stuck on an initial procedural mystery, which is if the Mueller team has scope limitations where they have to hand off cases to another district, how is it okay that everything circles back to them?
That's a good question.
There's a real combination of work between the Southern District of New York and the Mueller team that at least raises a question as to whether there's really a scope limitation on what Mueller's job is. But in terms of the exposure, I think the president doesn't have to worry about Cohen taking a witness stand anytime soon. I think this is the death knell for him as a witness. I heard Mr. Turley talk about it earlier, but I really disagree. I think there's enough horrendously negative credibility-based determinations in the SDNY, the Southern District of New York filing, that his time has come and gone for that. But I think the president has to worry that there might be sort of a greatest hits of cooperators making their way into a report, a paper version of Michael Cohen, of Paul Manafort and others, that will read much more compelling than if they were actually on a witness stand. So that's the worry, that there's these nuggets of facts about Russia or about collusion that get sanitized or scrubbed down and come into a piece of paper in a much more credible way than if these folks were on the witness stand.
Yeah, I want to take a look at one section here with regard to Michael Cohen's part of all of this. It says, let me just get to the right point here. It says the person offered, they're talking about a person in the Russian Federation, offered Trump's campaign, quote, political synergy and synergy on a government level. And then when it's translated into the document that was put out today by the government, it calls that campaign political synergy. They don't go further in terms of explaining what they mean by that, but what does that tell you, if anything?
Yeah, not much. I mean, because of the very fact that they're leaving it kind of purposefully vague. I mean, I think we have to look at it and realize that the situation with Cohen is essentially a failed cooperator. Manafort is a breach cooperator, which is on the same continuum, but maybe a deeper depth of hell for him. And so when they put information in there that Cohen is denying, it's going to be very hard to take that at face value as affirmative proof. It's just saying this is what we're asking about, and this guy wouldn't give it up. So I think we have to wait and see a little bit longer in terms of whether Cohen's information sees daylight in some other form.
All right. So with regard to Paul Manafort and going through the documents with regard to him, what you know, basically they detail the 5 ways in which they say that he broke his agreement with them. One of which it says, according to another Manafort colleague, Manafort said in February of 2018 that he had been in communication with senior administration officials up through February of 2018. That's one of the things that clearly ticked them off.
Yeah, they clearly had facts in mind. I mean, maybe established to some sort of metaphysical certainty, maybe not. And he wasn't giving him those facts. But again, I look at it from kind of the courthouse strategy side, and I think, you know, how did this happen with these two clients? I mean, Cohen basically gets a little bit of the half-pregnant status of getting some concession that he should get a tiny bit of relief from a 42-month or so sentence. Manafort, you know, tried to cooperate, bailed out of it in a bad way, and is now basically looking at spending the rest of his life in prison. So each of these, in some ways, are kind of rabbit holes for the Mueller probe, and I don't know that they can fairly take the good information that they got from the process of trying to flip Manafort and flip Cohen and turn it into something that's all that reliable or all that informative when it comes to the president.
Jim, is there anything in here that you think is particularly worrisome for the president tonight?
Well, I don't think either of them is a smoking gun. I mean, particularly the Manafort document is heavily redacted, but I don't think either is a smoking gun that says that, you know, he's in harm's way. Remember, he was told he was a subject, not a target, and to our knowledge, that hasn't changed. But there are some pretty nuanced factual elements that seem to still be capturing the special counsel's attention when it comes to meetings with Russia, timing of meetings with Russian officials. So I think the probe is wrapping up, but I would be concerned if I was in the White House that there's still some focus on collusion or obstructionist type behavior where he's not out of the woods yet.
And what about the suggestion about individual one and the coordination on the campaign, that the alleged campaign finance violation, that it was done at the direction of individual one? How troublesome is that for the president tonight?
Well, it's troublesome, but I don't think that's a big mystery that's solved. I mean, the campaign finance issue is not just simply whether hush money was given to these two women. It's the nature of the funding itself as well as the intent. So it's actually a pretty intricate area of law, and he may feel like he's in pretty good shape still to withstand that kind of scrutiny. It's not pretty, but it may not be a federal violation.
And ironically, if there's evidence that he made similar payments in the past and that the routine of how this payment was made matched the routine of how those payments were made in the past, that could be helpful to him, right?
Yeah, it's a spectacularly ugly but valid defense, right?
Yeah,
I do this all the time.
Jim Trusty, thank you so much. Great to have you with us tonight.
Sure.
Really
Thanks,
helpful.
Martha.
Thank you very much. So White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders and Rudy Giuliani weighing in on all of this moments ago. For more on that, we go to Fox News Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts once again this evening, who has been standing by throughout this whole process of all this breaking news tonight. Good evening, John.
Martha, good evening to you. Sarah Sanders coming out with a couple of statements just a couple of minutes ago. We had that one tweet from the president. Sarah Sanders saying, quote, of Manafort, the government's filing in Mr. Manafort's case says absolutely nothing about the president. It says even less about collusion and is devoted almost entirely to lobbying-related issues. Once again, the media is trying to create a story where there isn't one. And then on Cohen, the government's filings in Mr. Cohen's case tell us nothing of value that wasn't already known. Mr. Cohen has repeatedly lied, and as the prosecution has pointed out to the court, Mr. Cohen is no hero. I also spoke with Rudy Giuliani in just the past few minutes about all of this. He says it's a complete exoneration of the president, saying that they have nothing and that we are very happy about it. While the office of the special counsel says Manafort lied to them about his business dealings, Giuliani insists to me that Manafort was not telling lies about the president, and that the contrast between Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen, according to Giuliani, is that Manafort has nothing to lie about regarding the president, and Cohen doesn't know what to lie about. I also asked Giuliani about that reference to political synergy contained in the Office of Special Counsel memo. He said he didn't know what Michael Cohen was referring to, and that Michael Cohen certainly did not talk to the president about that particular aspect of it. I also asked Giuliani if he was worried at all about what might be contained in the redacted sections of the Manafort memo or the information that is under seal. Of the redacted sections, he said the beginning and the end of those parts don't relate to us, so he's not concerned about it. He's also not worried about the sealed information. The president's team and Manafort's attorneys have a joint defense agreement, and the president's team has been assured by Manafort's attorney, Kevin Downing, that there is nothing in any of the information regarding the Manafort case about the president, so they're not worried that anything under seal could be related to the president. And the president, just with that one reaction tonight so far, we don't know if he'll come out with another one. He's having Christmas dinner with the senior staff, but the president said in a tweet, quote, "Totally clears the president. Thank you." So the attitude here at the White House tonight is nothing to worry about, at least publicly. I mean, maybe behind the scenes and maybe personally, they are worried about what might be in some of that information, but on the surface, and publicly, at least, the pronouncements are all nothing to see here and nothing that they're worried about. Well, we'll wait and see what Mueller has to say.
I guess the tenor of how relaxed that Christmas party is with the senior staff would reveal a lot about that, John. So see if you can find out if everyone's having a good time in there.
We'll see.
Just how fun is the party? Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Good to see you tonight. Here now, Anthony Scaramucci, former White House Director of Communications under President Trump and author of the book Trump, the Blue Collar President. Anthony, good to see you tonight. Thank you for being here. Obviously, a ton of breaking news that we are digesting this evening, and we now have a pretty good handle in some ways on the government's case against Michael Cohen, who was an attorney and close confidant to President Trump for many, many years, and also Paul Manafort, who was his campaign director during the summer in the middle course of the presidential campaign. Your initial thoughts as you hear sort of about the coordination that is described in these documents and what you make of them so far?
Well, I mean, you know, I've said all along, I think a lot of people agree with me that the president really doesn't have a criminal problem or a legal problem per se. What he actually has is a political problem. And so if the Mueller report comes out and recommends, let's say, an impeachment process, well, then it's got to go through the House and Senate. And so I think the stuff that you saw today, and I think the president sort of indicating that with his tweeting, that he feels exonerated, he feels that he's going to come out of this thing unscathed. It'll remain to be seen what evidence is in there that could paint the president in a bad light, because obviously now, whether it's Michael, I don't know in Paul's case, but it certainly seems like in Michael's case, that he's shed some information about the president that could be negative about the president and some of the things the president's done personally. But again, I don't think that this is going to affect the presidency or President Trump's agenda. Moreover, he picked up seats in the Senate. A lot of people don't like talking about that, but he definitely had that electoral success last month. And so the combination of those things probably leaves him unscathed. I'm sure guys like Jay Sekulow and Rudy Giuliani that are digesting this information are probably signaling that to the president, which is why he's tweeting the way he is tonight.
All right. You know, part of what the issue is with Michael Cohen is this relationship and the money that was paid to Stormy Daniels and to Karen and to McDougal. So when you take a look at that moment in the campaign, you know, I mean, you've obviously been around these people for a long time. Michael Cohen was a self-proclaimed fixer for the president's bad situations. You know, and one of the things that I also find interesting as you move through this is Michael Cohen's argument that basically he was trying to carve out financial opportunities for himself every step of the way, that he thought he was going to get some sort of job at the White House that did not materialize. And then after that, he continued to try to work on these financial relationships to their greatest effect. So given those two things, the payouts that were made, which he claimed in a court of law were made to help the campaign, essentially, to ease the way for the campaign, and then also his own personal financial pursuits, which were obviously extremely important to him.
Okay, so let's break it down because I think we have to separate everything. Let's talk about the payments. And so what you could say on the payments is that if that was the president's operating procedure prior to him being president, he may be inside the circle of safety as it relates to criminality or a campaign finance violation. As it relates to the activities that Michael was pursuing, straddling between the campaign, possibly in the administration, or working as a de facto lobbyist and or advocate for people outside of the administration, let's say, it's unclear how the president is implicated in any of that. And so it doesn't smell great. I'm not one of these sycophants, Martha. It's probably one of the reasons why you invite me on. Stuff about this I don't love, but as it relates to criminality and the material test that you need to indict a president, and even if you can indict a president or impeach a president, it's not there yet. And so that's not to say that there won't be more shoes to drop, but today was not a bad day for the president, given all of the speculation that's been in the media. If you look at it crisply and analytically and objectively as a legal person, it wasn't a bad day for the president. Some of it doesn't smell great. But you know what? He was a hard-charging real estate developer, was living a very full life in New York before he flipped the switch to run for president. And so, you know, he had to know that some of this stuff would come out. I think he's surprised.
What bothers you? You say some of this stuff bothers me. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think it would. I think if you asked the average American about paying people like Stormy Daniels or the other woman from Playboy, the average American would say, okay, that's a little bit of a rough thing. That's stuff in his personal life that should probably be carved out and away from his political career and who he is as a politician. But they would probably say, okay, that's not probably casting the president in the best light. But as a legal person and somebody looking at it from a criminality test, did the president do something criminal, or could the president be impeached as a result of that sort of stuff? You know, I think that would be a very bad strategy for the Democrats that are going to control the House come January.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it would just lead to a doctrine of unintended consequences. One thing you have to remember about the president: he's a very adaptive guy. He's a very persuasive guy, and he's gotten a lot done for the American people. And so once the headwind of this Mueller investigation goes away, I think you'll see his poll numbers going up.
Well, he said all along that it's a witch hunt. Tonight he's tweeting, totally clears the president. Thank you. And that really was just digesting the Cohen documents, not so much at the point where we had all of the Manafort documents there. I want to ask you, because you were communications director for a short period at the White House, and you know all of these players very well. The suggestion that perhaps there will be a change in the chief of staff role, that John Kelly may be moving on, Heather Nauert being appointed to the role at the UN. Obviously, there's a process that has to play out there before that's confirmed, and also Mr. Barr as Attorney General. Your thoughts on these changes and what kind of White House, assuming that the rest of this moves to the side, as you suggest that it will? Tell me about these people in these roles.
So listen, you and I know Heather obviously from Fox in New York. I have an enormous amount of respect for her. She'll do a great job. I think people that are underestimating Heather are doing her a disservice, and I think they'll be surprised on the upside about how well a job that she's doing. You know, I've said a lot about John Kelly. I put a lot of my book about him. So I don't want to pile on as it relates to John Kelly. It is the Christmas season, so I will say that he was a great leader as a four-star general. Probably wasn't the best chief of staff, but let's move on. And whoever the president picks, I did say this in my book, and I'll reemphasize this here on your show, I just really hope that the guy likes the president, he or she really likes the president and puts the president's agenda.
You're saying John Kelly doesn't like the president?
Oh, I think that's very obvious that he doesn't like the president. You know, he can pretend that he likes him, but we all know that he doesn't. At least the people that are close to the president know that, and that's fine. You know, people don't have to like each other, but he should have been carrying his water and carrying the agenda in a way that he probably didn't. But I've said my piece there.
Well, okay, let me ask
I
one
wish him
last question.
well, and I want him to have you know, listen, I mean, he has served the country, and he lost one of his children in military combat. So I have an enormous amount of respect for the service. I wasn't in love with the way he treated me. There was no need to fire me like that. But those are my personal feelings, and I have no problem sharing them with you.
Would you go back to the White House if he wasn't there?
Well, I wouldn't get offered that. Like my wife always says, of course he would go back to the White House. Don't listen to him. Don't listen to his spin. But you know, the chance of me being offered an opportunity back in the White House, I got it at less than zero. I'm certainly enjoying being back here in New York. I'm in Washington today. I'm trying to get the high-pressure hose to get the swamp juice off me here, Martha. But, you know, we'll see what life brings. But, you know, for me, I love my business, love my family, and I'm trying to support the president and his agenda from this vantage point. And we'll just see what life brings. But I have that at less than zero.
Anthony Scaramucci, thank you very much. Good to have you with us tonight. Have a good night. You too. Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
So the other big story today, former FBI Director James Comey grilled on the Hill for hours this afternoon by the House Judiciary Committee. Congressman Matt Gaetz was in the room, and he joins us next.
When you read the transcript, you will see that we're talking again about Hillary Clinton's emails, for heaven's sake, so I'm not sure we need to do this at all.
Former FBI Director James Comey spending more than 6 hours today behind closed doors on Capitol Hill. This was highly anticipated. He was back to respond to more questions that the Republican Majority Committee had for him before the end of their term about Hillary Clinton's email investigation and other issues. But it seems that lawmakers weren't really satisfied with what they got today because they say they didn't get around to asking him a lot of things that they wanted to. So he's going to come back 10 days from now. He has agreed to that. Congressman Matt Gaetz is a member of the House Judiciary Committee and was in the room today. Congressman, thank you for being here tonight. Good to have you with us this evening. So what did he not want to answer today?
Well, the words that best describe Comey's testimony are selective amnesia. There was one part that I thought was particularly interesting. It describes his actions directly following his conversation with President Trump, where he believes the president may have obstructed justice by referencing the Michael Flynn investigation. As soon as Comey's done with the president, he prepares a memo and then meets with his senior team at the FBI. He couldn't tell us who was in the room, who was out of the room, and while he shared that the consensus was that they would not tell Jeff Sessions, they would not tell Rod Rosenstein, they would simply keep the information themselves, he would not share what McCabe's views were, what were the views of Bill Priestap or other people that may have been present. And I think that creates a problem for us because we want to get a sense of what people's viewpoint was during this particular critical moment in time.
So that if the statement that the president said was so egregious, you feel that he should have shared it with more people and that perhaps it wasn't shared in a way that made it appear to be a big deal at that time? Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, so in this sense, Martha, if the President of the United States committed a crime in Jim Comey's presence, it's bizarre that Comey never told anyone above him in the chain of command. And Sessions had not recused himself at this point in time. Comey used a phrase in the hearing today. He called Sessions on the cusp of recusal. And that was Comey's basis for not telling Sessions what had happened. But when you only are speaking to your subordinates, it's a different thing than elevating something that you would think would be ripe enough for a critical decision.
Yeah, I can't help but think, this is sort of an aside, but that there is some irony in the fact that James Comey says that the president asked him to go easy on Mike Flynn, right? And now what we've learned this week is that Robert Mueller has asked the judge to go kind of easy on Mike Flynn, which just makes you wonder if maybe what Mike Flynn did wasn't as bad as anybody thought, and maybe that was the president's intention, if indeed he did say that. And it appears to be the feeling of Robert Mueller, which is also based on the cooperation, of course.
Yeah, and the point you make highlights the bizarre nature of a lot of these process-based prosecutions. If I were President Trump, I'd pardon Paul Manafort. I would commute the sentence of Michael Flynn and be done with those two, because the only reason those people were prosecuted is because of politics, not because of their crimes. Look, if Manafort was going to be prosecuted as a consequence of his tax crimes or lobbying crimes, that would have happened like more than a decade ago. And you know who was in the decision tree for that? Rod Rosenstein, when he wasn't initially prosecuted. And so Manafort today faces consequence, not a result of what he did, but as a result of his service in the Trump campaign. And that's precisely why we ought to have the pardon power, so that you don't have overzealous prosecutors going after people because of their politics. President should pardon him right away, take it off the table. Cohen, very different story. I mean, Michael Cohen is being called to account for his present day improper conduct, the things that he's done. And I think in that circumstance, the Southern District of New York may be right that he ought to get a long prison sentence.
Well, we'll see. Just back to Comey for a moment here. He said when he came out of the room and he spoke with reporters, the suggestion that the FISA process was abused is nonsense.
Well, he wouldn't answer a lot of questions about the FISA process, but I think it's notable that in the information presented to the FISA court, there was not an accurate description of who paid for what. This is another area where Comey's testimony today contradicted his own lawyer. Jim Baker talked about how uncomfortable and weird it was that he had come into possession of the dossier and was part of the chain of custody for that dossier. That's not something that general counsels of the FBI typically do. Today, Comey told us that that he never knew that the Perkins Coie law firm was involved in taking money from the DNC and then using that money to pay Christopher Steele to say things and develop a story about the president. And so, like, that's pretty inconceivable to me that the general counsel of the FBI is uncomfortable coming into the chain of custody of evidence that had never happened before, and the director of the FBI somehow knows nothing about it.
Yep,
Another case of selective amnesia.
That is very interesting. You know, the other thing is the leak of Michael Flynn's name, which, you know, potentially is a crime, obviously, of leaking classified information that was picked up on an intercept between, on a conversation between the National Security Advisor and the incoming National Security Advisor and the ambassador to Russia. Did anyone ask him, did you get a chance to ask him whether or not there was any investigation into that, and whether or not, you know, what he knows about Sally Yates's potential role in all of that? Because she had her hair on fire about Michael Flynn early on.
Yeah, we should have asked more questions, but really a lot of the activity post May 9, Comey did not have information on because he had been terminated. We did ask about Sally Yates, but that was largely in the context of why in the world Comey and the FBI and the Department of Justice allowed people who were associated with Hillary Clinton's criminal conduct to then, you know, be around her and to participate in some of the interviews that were occurring at that time.
What did he say about that? You know, in terms of why Cheryl Mills was given immunity and why he wrote up his document of exoneration before he had even interviewed Hillary Clinton?
Comey's answer was, well, you know, the other people associated with Hillary, we sort of decided they probably weren't criminals, and so, gee, it was unusual, but we didn't think it would hurt the case too much. When you have institutions like the FBI and Department of Justice depart from their normal practices to do these one-off deals for people in politics or celebrity figures, it erodes our confidence that justice is blind and that it's equal for everyone. And I think that you don't have to just take congressional Republicans' word for it. Even the Democrat Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, said that Comey had a problem where he would regularly exceed the role of the FBI director. He would break the chain of command and he would simply take it upon himself to make all the major decisions. We saw that James Comey ego on full display today.
All right, I just want to ask you, one more question with regard to Paul Manafort, and when because you said you believe that he should be pardoned.
Yeah.
Have you read this document that came out tonight?
I was able to look through it, and it's not a function of Manafort's actions. It is why he is before the court. The only reason Paul Manafort is before the court is his association with the Trump campaign, not
but he was
the
investigated.
prior activities.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, but he's investigated within the scope of the Russian investigation. That is one thing that appears to be within the scope. He was doing a lot of lobbyist work for the pro-Russian Ukrainian element in Ukraine. So it appears that he's well within the scope of this investigation, obviously. And it also appears that perhaps there were violations of his registrations for doing work for foreign governments. So you're saying all of that, none of that matters?
None of that is the reason why he is being questioned. Again, like I think that if you have fruit of the poisonous tree, if you have an investigation that's been launched for political reasons, the fact that you find something unsavory about someone should not be used to try to leverage lies about the president. Remember, the reason Manafort had a filing against him by Mueller today is that he did not give Mueller the testimony that Mueller wanted. And so, like, one could reasonably read that to be that Mueller wanted to push Manafort beyond the truth, beyond the facts. Manafort wouldn't do it. Now he faces this serious consequence, perhaps because he wouldn't lie.
But both things could be true. The treatment of him could be completely unfair, and he could also have violated the FARA rules.
Yeah, absolutely right. But I think that if the reason he's being called to account is initially because of politics, that the greater threat, right, to our legal system is that you have political-based prosecutions. The greater threat is not the FARA violation from Manafort.
Thank you very much, Matt Gaetz. Good to talk to you tonight. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Martha.
Steve Hilton is coming up next. Stick around. Press Secretary at the White House, Sarah Sanders, releasing a statement in response to tonight's news from the special counsel, responding specifically to the filing in Paul Manafort's case by saying this: the government's filing in Mr. Manafort's case says absolutely nothing about the president. It says even less about collusion and is devoted almost entirely to lobbying-related issues. Once again, the media is trying to create a story where there isn't one. Steve Hilton joins me now, host of The Next Revolution. Steve, always good to get your thoughts on nights like tonight when there's a lot of news breaking, because I like how you always sort of take a step back and kind of get the 30,000 feet view of these things. Obviously, this is a story. I mean, we can't not cover the beginning of this investigation that's finally rolling out after a year and a half and try to read through the tea leaves and see what's in here. What stands out to you so far?
Well, I think what stands out is that nothing really stands out on the big point, which was supposed to be this evidence that the Trump campaign colluded with a foreign hostile power to overturn the election, to get involved in the election in an inappropriate way.
And welcome to Hannity tonight. A whole lot of brand new breaking news. All eyes tonight also on Robert Mueller, day 568 of the witch hunt. And just to recap, zero Trump-Russia collusion has been discovered. None. We do, however, tonight have new evidence that two top Democratic operatives could be in very serious trouble over their shady international dealings. We're going to bring you that report. Also, a huge blockbuster breaking story from the Hill's John Solomon, who has damning new information on the world's seediest charity. And there's evidence, the Clinton Foundation. And tonight we'll show you the latest controversy swirling around Democrat Kamala Harris. And we'll reveal the dire consequences from one company's war on the Second Amendment. And stay tuned, we have a mini monologue tonight on what is the media in this country's disgusting new low, if you can believe it. But first, sit tight, buckle up. It's time for a lot of breaking news. It'll take the full hour. Opening monologue. All right, tonight we are still awaiting Robert Mueller's next move. Two reports are expected before the end of the week, including new information on the special counsel's coordination with Michael Cohen, and as well as findings from the never-ending saga surrounding Paul Manafort. Oh, yeah, nothing to do with Russia. Neither case has anything to do with collusion. And on Tuesday, Mueller released its report on Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. That memo also providing zero evidence of collusion, a process crime. But leave it to fake news CNN to put facts last and immediately speculate that the Flynn memo was the beginning of the end for the president. Lies they've been telling us for 2 years. They just keep recirculating the same lies. Take a look.
The redacted document, if we can put it up, people on Twitter were literally speculating that part of this blacked out part, it matched the number of characters in the words President Donald J. Trump. That's the extent to which people are going here. You can see it there to try to figure out what's there.
For nearly 2 years, Robert Mueller and his merry band of Democratic donors, they have provided ample fuel for everyone who wants to destroy the administration, delegitimize a duly elected president. Now, today, the president made this astute evaluation, writing, quote, without the phony Russia witch hunt and with all that we have accomplished in the last almost 2 years, tax cuts, regulation cuts, judges, military vets, my approval rating would be at 75% rather than 50%, just reported by Rasmussen. It's called presidential harassment. And when Robert Mueller wraps up his investigation, he shouldn't have any trouble getting a job at the DNC. He's already raised millions of dollars for Democrats, worked overtime, full-time to destroy President Trump, and he has so many connections after all, he has staffed his entire probe with big-time Democratic donors, and even former Hillary Clinton lawyer over at the Clinton Foundation. But as the hunt continues, well, we can report good news to you tonight. A few on the left are actually finally being held accountable. Tomorrow, James Comey, he will now testify under oath in front of the House Judiciary Committee, and he will have a lot to answer for. And much of it surrounds Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. After all, remember, Comey, McCabe, Strzok, all previously stated Flynn did not appear to them to be lying. And now Flynn ultimately pled guilty to that charge, which stemmed from our federal government illegally what? We had surveillance, unmasking, no minimization, and then, of course, leaking raw intelligence on Flynn's international communications. So what did Comey know about that illegal unmasking and leaking raw intelligence? While Comey prepares for the hot seat, two other anti-Trump operatives are in hot water tonight. The AP is reporting that Democratic lobbyist Tony Podesta, the brother of Clinton campaign chair John Podesta, along with Obama's former White House counsel Greg Craig, they are now the subjects of a federal investigation into their lobbying efforts for the pro-Russia government of Ukraine. No criminal charges yet filed, but the investigation is reportedly ramping up as we speak tonight. And also breaking tonight, a damning new report from John Solomon at The Hill, revealing shocking details about the investigation into the Clinton Foundation. According to Solomon, he'll join us in a few minutes, a 2017, a whistleblower submitted thousands and thousands of pages of evidence revealing shocking allegations, including, quote, serious concerns about legal compliance, improper, literally commingling of personal and charity business, and, quote, quid pro quo promises made to donors while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. And it is important to note that the Clinton Foundation raised a whopping $62.9 million in 2016 when a Clinton presidency looked inevitable. The very next year, after a shocking defeat, the foundation only managed to raise a paltry, $26 million. Now, that is a very suspicious trend, given clear pay for play accusations surrounding the Clinton Foundation. Now, a spokesperson from the foundation did get back to us and tell us that it is one of the most heavily scrutinized charitable organizations in the world and is continually subjected to politically motivated allegations, and the foundation's CFO is denying any inappropriate or illegal activities. Well, we'll see. And by the way, Solomon has been very busy this week. Last night, right here on this program,